So what I'm going to do is just give a little bit of the flavor of the diversity and the variation that exists in the Commonwealth. And I'm going to sort of, it was interesting, I came here for the previous lecture, and it was quite interesting to hear about the detail of the challenges, which I think are extremely important. I'm going to sort of focus very broadly on some strengths and some challenges. And then I'm going to give an example of how I think cultural diplomacy has played a part and will continue to play a part in the climate change debate and negotiations. So just, this is about, so it's quite fascinating to see that it is one of the oldest such organizations. Its roots go back to 1870, although the formal reconstitution happened in 1849. And it is perhaps one of the organizations with the largest number of countries and covering 6 regions, and we've given the number of countries in each of the regions. It has a population of 2 billion people, which is about 30% of the world population. Over half of them are under 25 years old. Perhaps you've heard about this before. Now, if I can think of another body which is comprising of about 2 billion people, I can think of BRICS, which is 2 billion, because that has 2 of the most populated countries in the world. So although the number of countries in BRICS is smaller, however, the number of people or the representation of the world population is about equivalent to the Commonwealth. We know that the head of the Commonwealth is the Queen. And one thing I found fascinating when I looked at the leadership of the Commonwealth was that this has been what is fascinating is that going back into the 60s, the leadership of the Commonwealth has been extremely representative. So if you look at the Secretary General, the current one, who has been the Secretary General from 2008, is Mr. Kamlesh Sharma, who was formerly, before he took on this position, he was the High Commissioner of the Indian High Commission in London, and then he became this Secretary General of the Commonwealth. But if you look at the former representatives, they come from Canada, Guyana, Nigeria, and New Zealand. And what's interesting about this, it's not only the first world countries or the developed countries, but they have been represented from various parts of the world. And similarly, the chair in office, because it was the Australian, and Kevin Rudd has succeeded Julia Gillard. I'm sorry, the last line has gone, but the last line, the last name there is Julia Gillard. So I found this particularly fascinating because if you look, even the chair, we have South Africa, Australia, Nigeria, Malta, Uganda, Trinidad and Tobago, which is a small island, twice, and then we've had Australia. So the reason I found this particular, and this is happening from the 60s, the reason I found this particularly fascinating is some of us are involved with making other international organizations more representative. For example, the IMF or the World Bank, where it's not so easy to change the structure of these to have a greater representative leadership. And here is an example of the Commonwealth, which has had this really interesting range of representation. Then role of the Commonwealth, this is perhaps already well known and talked about, main values which unite them being democracy, freedom, peace, rule of law, and opportunity for all. So the equality basis comes in. And it believes that best democracies are achieved through partnerships of government, business, and civil society. And it also acts as a catalyst of global consensus building. So this has been the role of the Commonwealth for many decades now. So what else does it do? It is active in areas including development, environment and climate change, debt management, as well as trade. Although we're not so sure about how strong the trade is. And its main goals are, the 2 main goals are defined as peace and democracy, pro-poor growth, and sustainable development. And I think the concept of sustainable development means inclusive development, environmental sustainability, and all these things are covered through the concept of sustainable development. So I, being an analyst, wanted to show a little bit of data just to show how the world is different. This is the latest Human Development Index data. I hope you can see the numbers. And some of the things, I'm not going to go through all the numbers, but I'll just point out some of the things are evident. This has been ranked, the order of the countries is based on the country which has the highest Human Development Index. So here we see, look at HDI. Australia has the highest Human Development Index in the latest report. UK is less than 0.9. And then if you look at after South Africa, you see the numbers going down below 60. So India's Human Development Index currently is 0.55. However, then the changes that are happening are, if you look at average annual human development growth, there is where you see the changes happening. So if you look at the data for India, it's 1.5, and that's because of the where we are now. However, this also shows that there are several challenges for the Commonwealth as well as for development itself. So what are the major challenges? If you look at this statistic for India, the overall loss in Human Development Index due to inequality, that is 29. So, and there again you see the difference between these three here. These are the middle ones, and these are the ones where high levels of inequality exist. So that, I think, is what we see is what is happening to the world. Similarly, if you look at overall levels of satisfaction, here you have Australia and Canada. Actually, Australia and Canada is doing much better than UK, which should be. And then you have from Sri Lanka down, you have below maybe less than 5, the level of satisfaction being less than 5. In terms of GDP, again, these have high levels of GDP compared to 2005, and that's where you see what is changing. In the case of India compared to 2005, that is where the biggest change or the growth is happening. And what are the government spending on final consumption expenditure? So these obviously are spending above 18 to 23%, well, 23% of GDP, including South Africa, which is high. And then you have India, for a population of 1.2 billion, only about 12% of the GDP. This may change. This is 2011 data. However, in the current year, there have been lots more commitments by the government, be it for political reason or for the reason of development itself. There has been a big increase in government public expenditure, such as food for all, right to education. All these things have come in in the last, are happening year on year. Something new is happening. One of the largest food programs, food for all programs, has just been initiated in India. And so this is the foreign direct investment net flows. Those are some of the things. And population, of course, you have India having 1.2 billion. Migration, interestingly, in India it's minus 0.5, and these three countries is where the migration is at its highest. Now, another interesting figure I found was labor force participation. Understandably, if you look at India, women participating in the labor force is about 29%. These are of people 15 years and above. So in India, women participating is quite low. But and men is about 81%. This is 2011 data again. But I found it quite interesting that UK male labor force participation is less than 70%. This is people below 15 years and older participating in the labor force. Men less than 70% are actually, but no, rather only 70% are participating in the labor force, which I found to be an unusual number. So if you look at what do we have here, as these are be it challenges for India are also the challenges for the Commonwealth as I see it. So what are the challenges here? If you look at this data, there is the challenge of inclusion and sustainable development. These are inclusion and equality. These are the biggest challenges for sustainable development. So what do we see here? We see inequality is 29. This is and then there's only that much being put into funding. So when we look at this, that's very positive, which means there is a sort of growth, which is positive, but it is a sort of growth, but it has several challenges. And that, I think, is the key theme, that there's lots of good things happening, but there are also lots of challenges. So in this context, a recently published paper by Joe Stiglitz I thought would be interesting to look at, because we were talking about Commonwealth trade as a component of it. However, we're not very sure about what extent or level of trade exists between the Commonwealth countries, whereas many other partnerships like the BRICS and others are much stronger in the trade partnerships. So in that context, perhaps that's why this paper is quite prominently put up on their website, the fact that right to trade and what would be beneficial for the Commonwealth, and there's positive implications for developing countries within the Commonwealth through offsetting some of the increases in inequality and poverty that result from trade liberalization and aid. So both liberalizing trade as well as aid to improving the integration of least developed and small and vulnerable economies in a multilateral trading system. So I think this is a positive way for thinking that has been, that's very recent, it's just come out in the last month or so. So one other thing I want to focus on is what are the resources that the Commonwealth has. In terms of organizations, these are three key organizations, which is the Secretariat, the Foundation, and the Commonwealth of Learning. Funding is through voluntary contributions by member countries. The Secretariat and its work is financed by three separate budgets of funds, which are these three. Budget is based on SS contributions. Government contribute on an agreed scale based on capacity to pay. Over the past 6 years, the largest contributors for technical assistance program, this is only one aspect of the program, are Australia, Botswana, Brunei, Dar es Salaam, Canada, India, New Zealand, Nigeria, and the UK. So technical aspects are obviously very important. That's why I think hearing the previous speaker was quite interesting. Now, the challenge, however, is it's a major challenge. There are major resource gaps. As such a prominent body, it's quite interesting to see that its budgets are actually quite limited. So, and it clearly states that substantial money is needed to fulfill basic development objectives. They cannot be met by traditional sources such as donor governments, financing falling critically short in light of the current global economic challenges, concerns for the poorest, smallest, and most vulnerable countries. Now, I might have to update this number because this is the information I found on their website. But hearing about the 25 million on scholarships, perhaps that's in addition to this that was mentioned at the earlier talk. So this is for technical funding. That's about 29 million. And this is for Commonwealth Youth Program. So if you add these three up, it's only 49 million. Even if, I don't know if the scholarships are fed into the same amount or if it's an additional amount. So even if you count both, it's less than 100 million for an organization that large where the challenges of development are very high. Just as an indicator, I thought I'll give these two examples. For example, the DFID budget for 2012-13 is about 7.9 billion and it's expected to be 11.5 billion by 2015. Now that organization is able to do a lot because it is a significant amount of the budget by the taxpayer of the UK. And another example of, the World Bank lending for education and skills alone is about 500 million. It's a loan, World Bank obviously gives loan, and the loan that it has given to India is 500 million loan. So I'm just giving these indicators for you to just get your head around the numbers that it is not easy to do as much as the Commonwealth needs to and can do with the kind of resource gap that it has. So briefly touching on the role of cultural diplomacy. So, and I'll focus primarily on what the Commonwealth defines as the cultural diplomacy. So Commonwealth is an amazing diversity, and this is what its unique strength. It's an amazing diversity in terms of race, ethnicity, religion, gender, culture, and language. But all countries are considered equal regardless of wealth. And that is, I think, a distinctive definition to uphold. Distinctive cultures are celebrated and recognized. So what is the need for cultural diplomacy? As it defines, it's the ability to persuade through culture, values, and ideas, to promote cooperation, partnership, and understanding between the Commonwealth nations, to enhance unity based upon certain agreed common values and principles. Now, cultural diplomacy has expanded in an unprecedented way in all areas these days, political and economic spheres, and this is crucial to the world we live in today, where we are all more equal than we were ever before. But I'd also like to point out that the world we live in is extremely interesting because of the cultural diversity that exists. Now, if you look at the cultural, there is, for example, London is very different from England. Now, England is very different from Scotland. In Scotland, Edinburgh and Glasgow argue about their cultural differences. So that's the kind of a world we live in. Now, if you take the case of India, India is one country, it's a republic of 27, 28 states, sometimes increasing, 22 different languages, different kinds of dress, different kinds of food. So that's the amazing range of cultural diversity that exists. And to bring these cultures together and work and cooperate between these cultures is not an easy task. Now, when Indians come to UK, I know several Indians make very good friends with Pakistanis in the UK. But within the countries there is that constant conflict. But when people meet each other here, there is so much of commonality that binds them together. Now, what do I think of myself here? I've lived in this country for 17 years. I've spent the rest of my life in India. So what is my identity? Now, if you take my case, today I tried to look like somebody from the Commonwealth, but I am a citizen, overseas citizen of India. So my identity is Indian. My identity is British. My identity is Londoner, because London has its own identity versus Leicester, which is one of the most international, where I feel at home. I feel this is my home. What else do I feel? I feel I'm an Asian, because I work a lot with Asia, cooperation in Asia. And I also feel like a global citizen, because I'm engaging with these global issues from day to day. So each of us, within one person, have a whole range of diversity within us. And how do we then try to bring this together is what is very interesting, as well as also very challenging. So what is the role of culture? I will continue with the role of cultural diplomacy. So it is a soft power, because we can't define economy, politics, society. So it's a soft power, but it is an important power. And that's what was being described even in the earlier lecture, that the developed world imposing its thinking on in other parts of the world where the whole thing is different is not the only, or it's not, in fact, it's not the right way forward. It is about listening, it's about understanding, and it is about understanding each other's problems and issues and good things and challenges, and trying to bring that together and work together for the benefit of both. I think that is what is needed, and it's a soft power. That's why it's even more complicated. So what can it do? Promote peace and stability through intercultural relations. Some of the partnerships that are formed through that way sometimes balance the conflicts, that can help to balance the conflicts that can happen. And it has a great potential for enhancing international cooperation. So how is cultural diplomacy? Through interdependence between global economies. So are the ideas, and now what I'm going to do is just focus a little bit on the case of climate change and how cultural diplomacy has been extremely important. So are the ideas about climate change and the policies from different governments influenced by the cultural specific elements of the various countries involved in the global debate about climate change? So the success of climate change initiatives beyond unilateral policy innovations, beyond financial challenges, and what is needed is to mobilize cultural diplomacy and to integrate the work of cultural institutions into the existing structures and working practices of public diplomacy. And who is better positioned to do this than a group of people like the Commonwealth? So what are the main focus of environment and climate change concern for the Commonwealth? Natural resource management, environment governance, urbanization in the Commonwealth. These are, of course, key challenges and or areas of importance for the individual countries as well. So what is, for example, India grappling with in terms of having a sustainable, environmentally sustainable development? It's natural resource management, meaning primarily water resource management, then governance and urbanization. These are the main challenges. So as China, one of the biggest issues that China is trying to address is the urbanization, issues of urbanization in the country. So what is the Commonwealth strategy on climate change? It's of crucial concern for the Commonwealth member states, promote sustainable development, and the focus, rightly so, is on small island developing countries, because these are some of the most vulnerable countries of the world when it comes to environmental issues. So I think it's rightly that the Commonwealth is focusing on small island developing states. So this is just an example of, again, the range of differences between the developed country and other countries. So if you look at total energy consumption, I've hidden this because I don't think, because Trinidad and Tobago is a prosperous country, so this is per capita energy consumption. So it looks high because of it being a small island and small number of people, and then also in proportion CO2 emissions seem very high, but there could be other small islands which are not so comfortably positioned, so where there are challenges are higher, but I don't have that data now. But so if you look, these are the countries where the emissions are highest. Now, and this is where I think India is a strong can be a strong voice. For a 1.2 billion population, its per capita energy consumption is still only 575 kilos, and its emission is less than 2 metric tons per capita. So that's why in all these past negotiations, India also has had to learn. This is why it is cultural diplomacy, because India was also making not the right noises before, whereas in recent years it has begun to learn. But in that sense, India is perhaps the strongest member of the Commonwealth, which can make its voice heard for a common, but for good moving forward as a world. So what is the Commonwealth Action Plan? It underscores the diversity within the Commonwealth, recognize the respective capabilities of states, especially least developed and developing countries, and the importance of developed countries taking the lead. It resolves individually and collectively to pursue active participation through the UNFCCC. It also says that negotiations should be inclusive in nature and should work towards outcomes that are ambitious, comprehensive, equitable, and have respect for different national circumstances and provide for flexibility in addressing climate change. So quickly, how has India been leading? I remember in 2005 sitting at these conferences where the Indian minister would say, you have to let us, the rest of the world did this, so you have to let us do this. And that's where I was kind of screaming inside saying that's not the way forward. It's not that, we all learn from our childhood, maybe we are taught saying, do you want to make the mistakes of others, or do you want to learn to avoid the mistakes of others? That was what was screaming in my head when that was the ministerial stance that was being taken 8 years ago. However, India has gone through a major change since then, and in the last 5 years more so. So even say the Copenhagen negotiations were one of the most difficult ones. There were some positive things, but they were also the most difficult ones. But since then, I think the world as a whole, whenever it meets at these conferences, is moving in the right direction. And I think there, while the phrase of cultural diplomacy may not have been had, but the fact that there are this whole group of nations sitting together, both in small groups as well as large groups, talking and actually hearing about each other's problems, internal problems. And in these cases, I have sat in some of the meetings where when you hear the stories from small island countries and also hear the concerns that they have, and also where the small island countries have understood that they are at the greatest threat, and then whoever has has the capability to hear and listen and understand, would be, it would be impossible for them to actually understand that there are other problems, and then the world has to come together and act together. So what has India's role been? I'll just take the example of India. It's been a key player in the global climate negotiations more recently, because through this other partnerships, it has also played a very strong role. It's now being woven into wider foreign policy objectives, particularly its strategically important relationship with US and China. A desire to foster these relationships has encouraged India to introduce some flexibility to its previously fixed negotiating positions, as I mentioned. And this has in turn led to India's growing international importance in climate negotiation. So in COP16, it played a constructive participation. And it was very critical to, in fact, some of these would have happened at the last minute, that you got a more flexible and more a negotiation and a draft which would be more acceptable to majority of the countries. So Indian negotiators were able to get the backing of the EU and the G77 countries, and succeeded with their proposals to set up a mechanism for technology transfers to deal to the two main challenges, so technology transfer and financing for dealing with climate change issues. Sorry, going back. So it's been able to influence all these rounds of negotiations. So in terms of climate change and global cooperation, I think this is what the Commonwealth is focusing on. Climate change is one of the largest problems, and global cooperation to address is very important. To provide a solution, cross-cultural communications will be necessary. The cultural differences between countries will invariably influence both the content and their message, as well as the way it's expressed. So common but differential rate of change is what is being debated about. So cultural diplomacy is helping drive global climate change negotiation through greater coordination between countries, strengthening partnerships, and enhancing international collaborations. So finally, I'm trying to sort of look at a few suggestions based on this sort of wide range of aspects that I tried to touch upon. So there are some strengths and there's some challenges which need to be looked into. Commonwealth is the largest partnership of nations, which means it's its greatest strength. It is already has an experience of partnerships. It's the most diverse in its composition. That is its strength, but it's also its challenge. But then it has the experience of having worked together for several decades. It's most experienced in cooperation among diverse cultures, and it works as partnerships. It has to address the resources gap, which is a major challenge when it's trying to cover a lot, and it includes a lot of people, and the countries within the Commonwealth have a lot of social and economic challenges. An example of trying to address the resource gap could be, for example, it tries to partner with DFID. I don't know if it already exists, but it could when DFID has a large budget and it's trying to address the developmental issues in several countries which are part of the Commonwealth. I think here's an opportunity for the Commonwealth Secretariat to work closely with DFID and try to, the cooperation will help both of them. And I think the most important role the Commonwealth has with all these background is that it can enhance its potential as a leader for cultural diplomacy for the promotion of democracy, peace, inclusive and sustainable growth. And that's its objective. It already has a lot of strengths and experience of cooperation in all these several decades, but it has a challenge that it is not doing as much, or it can do a lot more, because there is a lot to be done. And this is where it needs to enhance its potential to be a leader in cultural diplomacy. And a possibility is also it's not only working as in cooperation with countries within the Commonwealth, but also working in cooperation with other bodies such as such as the SAARC or IBSA or BRICS. That would also enable it to enhance its own potential and its reach.